Somebody's going to win there. Hope someone's up here too. But all right, these are the 5 questions. I've already explained to the audience how they evolved and how important they are, so I won't go through that. But question number 1 is on priorities. Your priorities. If you were elected, what would your top 3 legislative priorities be?
First thing I'd like to do is see us do away with the national income tax, do away with the IRS, do some sort of a national sales tax, fair tax. I would work with other conservative congressmen that are all around this district, joining with their numbers, and try to get some meaningful tax relief for folks. I'd secure the borders. That's important. We've got to get a handle on what's going on the borders, find out who's here, why they're here, and if they don't belong here, they need to go back. If we need a guest worker program, or if they want to get legal and come back legally, then that would be, we would figure out a way to make that happen. And third, we need to win the war on terror. That war is not over. In fact, it's only getting worse. We had a problem last year. One of the things I went after Chet Edwards on was the fact that he was willing to vote to cut off the funding for our troops in Iraq at the height of the battle. This is when our guys were over there fighting and dying. And so he could make points with Nancy Pelosi. He voted to cut their funding and bring them back in defeat. That was wrong then, it's wrong now. Now they got a handle on, they got a handle on things in Iraq. We're not sure where it's going because everything's being focused back to Afghanistan now, and it needs to focus on Afghanistan. But the bottom line is I disagree with the Obama administration that doesn't even want to call it a war on terror anymore. They don't want to call them terrorists. Well, I say they are terrorists. They need to be defeated no matter where they're at. I don't care if it's Afghanistan, Iraq, or North Africa. We need to finish the fight that we started. Well, actually, they started. We were attacked, and we've been attacked since the 1970s. So those will be my priorities.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The second question is on the bill review process. What do you say to people who are angry that congressmen often do not read the bills they are voting on?
Well, for me, the answer is real simple. For one thing, if you saw the recent health care bill, we had it in our town hall meeting. It's like this thick. And then if you go through it, it's all legalese that even when you see what's read and you state what's read, they'll tell you, well, it doesn't really mean that. In fact, there's one line in there that talks about tax. This tax shall be not be called a tax. Well, what the heck is that? The problem is we got too many lawyers, I think, in Congress. Let's get some business owners, some people that are real people and that understand what's going on and can think like real people. The problem with some of these bills is they're just so ridiculously lawyerese that literally you have to be a judge to even understand half of them. And that's the problem we got. So yeah, I would like to see us get to let's open government up to more folks and make it simple so that we are back in control of the government and not the government back in control of us. And that's the bottom line. We got to get real folks in Washington.
The third question has to do with health care. And what part of the American healthcare system needs reform, and do you support guaranteed health care for every American?
I support guaranteed access to health care for every American. And I think there's a number of ways we can do it. I agree with the Republican proposals that have been put forth. We can do it through tax incentives. I'm a small business owner. I've got a number of employees, and if suddenly I'm told by the federal government, well, you're going to have to start supplying all these folks with this type of health care, it's going to drive a lot of small business owners either out of business or they're going to wind up letting folks go. I mean, make no mistake about it. That's the problem with Washington. They have all these wonderful ideas, but when it comes to the reality of making those ideas work, they're not in the real world. For instance, my opponent last year, the man's never held a job in the private sector in his adult life, and yet he wants to dictate to us what's going on in the real world. That's got to stop. I think there's ways we can reform it. Quite honestly, we've got the best healthcare system in the world, and I think to do what we've got with Healthcare Bill 3200 is just a joke, to sit there and take over the entire healthcare industry when we have the best healthcare industry in the world already. People in Canada and Britain are lining up to come over here. We're not lining to go over there and take advantage of their healthcare system. So we can tweak it around the edges. We can make sure that everyone has access to healthcare, which quite honestly they do now. You go to an emergency room, etc., you can't get turned down. We have a hospital in Waco, the Hillcrest Hospital, was in one section of town. They just finished moving to the other section of town because they were getting the vast majority of the indigent care, because folks would come there and they get free care. So bottom line is we can tweak it, but let's not completely overhaul it.
Thank you. The next question is on the Constitution. What will you do if you believe a piece of legislation is outside the powers granted specifically to Congress by the U.S. Constitution?
I'd vote against it. That's the problem we've got nowadays, is we've got too many folks that are more concerned about getting reelected and making a legacy for themselves. And to me, that's the problem. We've got to get back to the basics. The Constitution, the Founding Fathers had a certain parameters that they really thought our government should be operating under. And I think that the prime one of those, and that's where our problems have developed. Our Founding Fathers never envisioned a professional class of politicians. And that's the key problem right there. We've got to get back to the basics where citizen statesmen, you go to Washington, you serve your country, you serve your fellow man, you serve your district, and then you come back and live under the laws that you just helped enact. And that's the problem. We've got too many guys in Washington that, for instance, my opponent, has never held a job in the private sector. That's a problem. We've got to get to a situation where we've got real people representing us and real people living under the laws that they create. So I'm firmly in favor of getting back to a basic reading of the Constitution. I have another problem with judges, too. We've got judges now that don't care to follow the Constitution, or as some of the liberal Supreme Court justices are talking about, they want to go with European law to come up with their rulings. Well, that's just plain wrong. We should rely on nothing but our Constitution and only the Constitution to decide if something is constitutional or not. Quite honestly, I don't care what happens in Europe, whether or not their law decides whether or not it's constitutional. Our law needs to.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. The last question is on term limits. What is your position on setting term limits for U.S. representatives and senators?
We hear that a lot. That's a question that's asked a lot. Quite honestly, I'd have to see the bill that comes before me. I'm afraid to get to a situation where you have a good congressman up there or a good senator up there, and depending on what the limit is what I would look at. For instance, is it 3 terms? Is it 4 terms? Is it 5 terms? I think you got to have a few terms to at least get yourself acclimated to what's going on and to become effective. Of course, now my goal would be to work with other conservative congressmen through the area, join their numbers, and get things done that way. But for me, depending on what the bill is that comes before us, I would probably vote for term limits, depending on what the bill says. Because I think in principle, like I just said in the last question, we need more citizen statesmen. We don't need professional politicians living up there forever. The problem with term limits, though, is you might end up throwing out some really good folks. But then again, they might get replaced by really good folks. So again, I want to see what the bill says. I want to see what the limitations are. But my instinct at this point would be to agree that we do need some kind of term limit.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. You did a good job. Get a bottle of water and use the restroom.